All right, guys. Hope everyone's having a great Lent. Welcome back. This is our weekly To the Heights podcast. Really journeying with the Pray 40 with the Hallow app. This journey we're on for 40 days. And really quick, if you're not following along, that's okay. We encourage you to. But if not, to check out the life of this man named Takashi Nagai. He's up for sainthood in the Catholic Church. I believe he's a servant of God, the kind of first step. Survivor of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki, Japan in 1945. Incredible story. I've been moved nearly to tears a few of these moments reading about his life. I think they should make a movie about this guy.
Yeah.
But really quick to catch everyone up. So this guy survived the atomic bomb, was only a half a mile from the bomb blast in Nagasaki, working in the hospital where he served as a doctor, as a physician. But this guy, just an incredible example of forgiveness, of faith amidst trial. Growing up, he kind of walked away from any kind of faith he had. It was a proclaimed atheist. He eventually lived with his family, fell in love with their daughter, and eventually converted to Christianity, Catholicism, and had this incredible conversion in his life. And one of the beautiful things about him is that he had this moment where he converted, really accepted the Christian faith, was baptized. But really, you see how the sanctification, like St. Jose Maria Escriva says in a quote from the Pray 40, but really it's the work of his whole life. And one of the things that we're going through this week, it's the week of suffering, they're calling it, of this week, this theme of Pray 40. And we're really looking at this, how he responded to the atomic bomb. He lost everything, right? His beautiful bride, Midori, passed away from the bomb. His children, I think, survived. They were outside the city. But he himself would only live a couple of years after that.
Right.
But just really lost everything he had and his response to it. So we'd love to hear kind of feedback from you, Matt, about just like initial reactions from what he experienced, how he responded.
Yeah, unbelievable story.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, truly, this man was amazing in every way. And the journey of his life in the story that's told is such a great example of what we're talking about and the suffering that he went through and the experience that he had on the other side of it. It's an amazing thing that everybody really should listen to. And there's so many things that we'll talk about that came out of that story that we're continuing to hear about. I was very moving and very emotional.
Amen.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Matt, I'll kind of start at the end of the story. But after Nagasaki happens, right, the bomb happens, I believe it was August 9th, 1945. I think 3 months later is November, like 23rd, around there, in Hallow, in one of the reflections that Takashi is giving a talk to the people in his parish in the cathedral in Nagasaki. And he actually says that Nagasaki, with everything they lost, he talked about his beautiful wife, Midori, her passing, all his friends who died, his work was thrown away, right? Everything, his home, really like a Job moment, losing everything. But he said, you know what? Nagasaki was the lamb sacrifice for the rest of the world, so the world could have peace, right? Because right after that happened, Japan surrendered, right? The war started to come to an end, and he saw this, how God's hand, even though, right, so God does not desire the loss of human life, God does not desire suffering, but Takashi had this incredible faith to see, God, even your goodness and your love can work through the darkest day in human history. And he said, Nagasaki gave up its life, right? All that it was, for the sake of peace in the world. And think of like this guy has this kind of faith, this kind of vision, just 3 months after losing his wife and everything he knew. You know, I can't believe, thinking about the sufferings I go through and how quick I stub my toe and I'm mad, you know?
Right.
It's like, holy smokes, that kind of faith. So I don't know.
Incredible conviction that he's had in his life. To be able to see it that way, to have that kind of perspective, that's only from truly meaningful interactions and experiences with God. There's no other way to explain it, right? I mean, he was a believer from every way you could possibly look at it. And it's so inspiring to think about it that way, that he was able to see that the suffering that those people had to go through to save everyone else. And that those examples are throughout history. It's just the way it has to be sometimes. It's pretty amazing to hear about all the things that he went through.
Gosh,
and
man.
I mean, it's incredible.
And last Sunday we heard Father Mike's homily in the Pray 40 app, and he dove into Takashi's story. And one of the things he talked about was how we all love mountaintop experiences. We all love the peak, we love the highlight reel and those beautiful moments that we can look back to as like, oh, that was the best, But he said so often we want the peak, but we don't want the valley.
Right.
What do we don't want. We want the view at the top of the mountain, but we don't want to do the climb, the hike up the mountain. And so often that hike, and I love how he pointed this out in relation to Kashi and in relation to all of our lives. the hike is hard. You know, the
Right.
climb is hard. And even the mountaintop experiences, he made the relation, connected it to Jesus on the mountaintop, right? What is the mountaintop of Jesus' life? It was Calvary, right? That was when he showed the Father's heart the most. It was when he's in most intense pain, most intense suffering, most intense rejection, right? Kind of like Takashi, that moment of intense suffering after losing everything was the moment that he showed his faith the strongest. And he showed the light, the most light in his life, right? Was that most difficult moment. So I want to kind of hear from you, Matt, about like, man, like how do we experience, like a man like Takashi, obviously Jesus Christ, this incredible journey with the Father. How do we foster that so that when we face those moments, we have that same faith, that same conviction, you know?
Yeah.
Put you on the spot here.
Well, I think it's an everyday journey for us. And like you talked about, I mean, those mountaintop moments are the things that we all live for. Yeah. But we don't understand that through the journey, through the suffering, through the work that it takes to experience those things is where the real growth happens. And those moments are when we come closer to God. So, you know, just to think about the suffering that he went through, I honestly, there's so many thoughts that are going through my mind. It's kind of overwhelming to try to express it in a real way. But I think for me, my experience is that the times that I feel closest to God are the times when things don't go right, when we have tragedy, when we have suffering in our lives. And so, you know, I was sharing the story with you earlier about going to a funeral, one of my really good friends. And those moments when we walk in and see each other and we have these genuine embraces and these times where we're really so happy to see each other, that is not just because we haven't seen each other in a long time. That's because we realize that in that moment that God is present and that the afterlife is something that we're presented with at that time, and that we all realize that all the other stuff is really insignificant, but those moments are the true moments where you really find meaning and purpose in your life. Man, and that has that's never been more apparent than when I read this story.
Gosh, man, as you were sharing, one of the stories from Takashi's life that jumped out to me when him and his bride Midori, when they first got engaged, Takashi actually knew his life expectancy was short because he worked in the X-ray department in the hospital. He was a physician, and he knew at that time, you know, X-ray would, you know, radiologist, right? The radiation would cause cancer pretty quickly. And he told Midori this, and Midori said, I'm not afraid. Like, I'm not afraid of experiencing that suffering. I want to be on this journey with you, however much time God gives us. And it's funny, flash forward maybe 3 or 4 years later, they're married, they have some children, and then he experiences this moment where he has leukemia, and they give him a life expectancy of a few more years. So he goes home, tells Midori, right? And she remembers that time. She said yes. She was like, I'm not surprised, and I'm not afraid, because I signed up for this. But she also, in that moment, she didn't respond with anger. She didn't respond with, you know, fear of what was going to happen, even though she probably experienced all that. But what did she do concretely? The story said she went over to the image of Mary in their home. She lit a candle, and she prayed in front of the statue of Mary. And to think like, oh my gosh, this intense trust in the Lord, then in our difficult moments, where do we turn? You know, because all of us turn to something, right? Well, sometimes we turn to things that are not good for us, right? Like, oh my gosh, could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be just my phone, just to like distract myself, right? What are those things that we're looking for healing, for some, there's an answer? And the only one, right, is Christ. He's the only one that is on the cross with us that can say, here's my heart, I'm here with you. And I have a vision for you that we might not see in the moment, but just like Midori, just like Takashi knew, man, I don't know the answer right now, but he does. This guy on the cross with me. You know, I don't know.
Well, how much you admire, or I admire, like I said before, that conviction that she had, that he had, where you truly, truly believe that God gave his life for our eternity, and that this life that we're living in now, which is difficult sometimes, there's trials and tribulations, is only... it's not the end. He talked about that, the beginning and the end, and how we see that. To have the peace that comes with believing and knowing that when you die or someone that you love dies, that your life on earth comes to an end is only the beginning.
Gosh, man.
The power of that. I mean, if you really think about that.
Dude, can I read this quote you just summarize?
Yeah.
It's from St. Jose Maria Escrivá, because we're going through the book The Way, alongside Takashi's story. But this stood out to me too. St. Jose Maria said, for others, death, he's talking about, you know, for Christians, how we view death, and for people who don't know Christ, how they might view death. For others, death is a stumbling block, a source of terror. For us though, Death is an encouragement and a stimulus. For them, it is the end, and for us, it is the beginning. Yeah. So to think, like what you just said, man, holy smokes, man, like the greatest fear many of us have, besides public speaking, is death, death and rejection. Yeah. But that moment that no one has experienced until you meet it, right? Head on. It's like, what's that going to be like? What's next? Is my life over? Is everything over? Yeah. But as Christians, we have this incredible hope that our God didn't shy away from it, but he entered into it so that we could have life everlasting with him. Death didn't have the final say, And
why wouldn't you want that?
Oh, my gosh, man. Yeah. Oh, and that was one of the things that moved Takashi to finally say yes, was this like, oh, my gosh, because he experienced pain and death with his friends when he went to war before World War II. But he said, man, is death the end? And he's like, I don't think so. I got to figure this out. Right. And it led him to Christ and this deep faith,
Yeah. So. Oh, and slightly unrelated, but it makes me think of this is, there's so many gifts in our lives, and we think that we own these things. With Father Leo, I was talking to him just outside this building several years ago when my boys were little, and we were talking about the kids, and I was talking about something that I had some conflict with about how my kids this and that, and he said to me, they're not yours, right? Mm-hmm. And I had never thought of it that way. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, they're a gift from God.
Gosh,
His kids aren't yours. He's just loaning them to you for a little while.
Gosh.
And to have that sort of perspective, to realize that, I'm not in control. I'm just responsible to do the best that I can at that particular time.
Yeah.
And to understand that there's so many gifts in our lives that we need to be grateful for.
Amen.
And that this is just one little experience in the grand scheme of things.
Gosh, that hits home as a parent now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, how beautiful. Well, man, thanks for sharing, man. Last thing we could kind of end with, but Takashi's story, one of the things as he, we might have mentioned in a previous episode, but after the atomic bomb, everything's ash. He walks outside the hospital where he was. And he's trying to help anybody survive. I think 80% of the people in the hospital died.
Yep.
He was one of the survivors. He walked outside and he said this verse that was on his heart. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And he said that prayer was on his heart. He kept saying it over and over again. And I think to just like how many of us, right, when we just like you said, we all face difficulty, we all face suffering, but how do we respond?
Right.
How do we see it? And I think it is a choice, and every person's encounter with suffering is so different. It's never good to compare crosses, right?
Right.
But just to journey with one another in it, to encourage one another. But we do have this choice to say, you know what? Just like Midori, just like Takashi, God, I don't understand. I don't see it. I don't see the why, but I trust you. I know you're good. This isn't good what's going on,
right.
But I know you're good. And I know you're the ultimate driver of this car,
Yeah.
So to encourage one another in that and to pray for one another to say, man, even though we don't know what's going on, the why behind it, I know God's good and I can trust him.
Right.
And he knows my tomorrow,
Right.
So anyways.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, choices, we all have them.
Yeah.
And, the power of the mind is pretty incredible. But when you combine that with a relationship with God, you probably can get through
Amen, man.
anything.
Amen. Awesome, man. Well,
Good
cool.
stuff.
Looking forward to journeying together. Guys, have a beautiful, is it week 4 of Lent now? Gosh, we're journeying along.
Yeah.
Hope everyone's doing great. All right. We're praying for you, and God bless.